MCHV Calcutta embodies the striving towards evolving the Vedantic ethic from the Indian deep structure. And one of the many activities that MCHV conducts in this direction is to present 4 annual orations in memory of the splendid quartet to which MCHV has been dedicated. Rabindranath Tagore, Swami Vivekananda, Mahatma Gandhi, and Sri Aurobindo. For these people have lived Indian thought outstandingly in both purity and practicality. So I welcome Swami Sarvapriyananda ji, who has very kindly agreed to talk on this occasion organized to celebrate Swami Vivekananda's birth anniversary. Swami ji is from Ramakrishna order, and he is presently the head of Vedanta Society of Newark since January 2017. He is a very prolific speaker and a strong proponent and scholar of the Indian Upanishad school of thought and philosophy, particularly self and consciousness. He is delivering many lectures on this topic. Fortune India mentions Sarvapriyananda ji as one of the best known lecturer of the Vedanta in world today. Welcome, Sarvapriyananda ji. We can start. Swamiji, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bhuiya, for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to meet all of you. I would have loved to be there in person, and actually I was planning to visit India, but it all got postponed because of the surge in the COVID cases, both in India and here in New York. Why New York? The Vedanta Society in New York is actually the first Vedanta Society established by Swami Vivekananda. When he came in here in 1893, in the very next year, 1894, he came to New York and he established the Vedanta Society of New York. In fact, we sort of proudly say here that the Vedanta Society here was established before Belur Math itself in Calcutta. So let me start with a chant, and then we'll get into the subject itself. Om Namah Shri Yati Rajaya Vivekananda Surai Satchid Sukha Swarupaya Swami Netapaharine. It's wonderful to be virtually, unfortunately, with all of you in the MCHV at IIM Kolkata. I have wonderful memories of actually being there in person and attending programs and giving talks also. I remember many of the old-timers, let's say, Professor Chakravarti, and then Professor Sanjay Mukherjee, Professor Panduranga Bhatta, and others. I think some of the seniors are still here. So my namaskars to all of them and all those others who have joined us today. Swami Vivekananda's birthday, 12th January, is the National Youth Day. And I think it's very appropriate. Swami Vivekananda himself used to say that I won't live to see 40. And he passed away at the age of 39. And all that he accomplished was in this period between 11 September 1893, when he addressed the World Parliament of Religions in Chicago for the first time, to 4th July 1902, when in Belur Math, he gave up the body in Mahasamadhi. Less than 10 years, really. All of that he accomplished was in this period. He passed before the age of 40, and which is, we lost him at that age, but you know, that makes it so appropriate that he's the youth icon for India. He's forever young. We never got to see a Vivekananda who's 60 years old or a Vivekananda who's 80 years old. It's the young, dynamic, spiritual personality which we see in all the pictures and all the artwork depicting him. So this icon of the youth not only in India, I would say he's a worldwide figure. What did he accomplish? What exactly was the net result of his efforts here in the West and in the East? Well, what he did is tremendous. He set out to do primarily two things. One is transmit the accumulated spiritual heritage of the East, of India, to the West. And second, to awaken his motherland. And all this he did in this less than a decade, and then he was ready to go. I mean, what a dramatic life. I hope one day a very good feature film will be made about this life, at least at the level of Attenborough's Gandhi. And that is the hope that someday something like that will happen. It's certainly a tremendous, dramatic life. More you read about it, the more inspiring it is. First, what did he do here in the West? I think Vivekananda was definitely the pioneer. Before Vivekananda came, there was some idea about Vedanta, about Indian thought, especially among the American transcendentalists. Emerson, Thoreau, then Walt Whitman. So these American poets, writers, philosophers, they were heavily influenced by the Upanishads and the Gita. But from an authentic teacher, the message spreading out to the masses of America, that happened for the first time with Swami Vivekananda, especially when he came on the world stage on 11th September in 1893 in Chicago in the World Parliament of Religions. Those who have visited Chicago, you know that the Art Institute, which is still a premier museum for art, the street in front of that is called Vivekananda Way. And when you go in there, they have a plaque that the Hindu monk came here and he gave this talk on 11th September 1893. Part of that stage is still preserved. They open the door. If you're a visitor from India, they'll let you go inside and take a look. So after Swami Vivekananda, if you see what happened, it's not only the other Swamis of the Vedanta Society of the Ramakrishna Mission who came to the West, but this whole stream of teachers from India, yogis and swamis and philosophers and lamas, and not just Vedanta or other streams of Hinduism, but also Buddhism, and later on Sikhism and Jainism also. All of it came in a stream from India. They traveled, this message traveled through them to the West. Phil Goldberg, in his book American Veda, has traced the development of Hindu thought and the contributions of Hindu thought to the West, and he starts with Vivekananda and he continues for the next 100 years. After Vivekananda came, again from the same city where you are sitting in Calcutta, came Paramahamsa Yogananda, the Self-Realization Fellowship. After him came, Maharshi Mahesh Yogi, the founder of ISKCON, Srila Prabhupada, here in New York. Srila Prabhupada was here in New York and started the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, which is a worldwide organization now. The entire yoga movement, the physical side of it, it's just these lone yogis from the south of India, in fact, from Mysore, Pattavi Joyce, then BKS Iyengar, Krishnamacharya. So they all came and started the yoga movement, which is a vast worldwide phenomenon. I was part of a seminar on globalizing Indian thought organized by IIM Kozhikode, and there saying that look at something like yoga. It is already done, an accomplished fact that it is globalized. The International Day of Yoga is popular because already the work has been done. It is a global phenomenon. Swami Vivekananda was at the root of it all. He was the one who opened the door to this influx of Indian thought and Indian teaching. In fact, Phil Goldberg writes in his book, this American Veda, there's a chapter on how how these teachings coming through Vivekananda and other teachers influenced the intellectual elite of America. Aldous Huxley and Christopher Isherwood and Gerald Heard and Houston Smith, Joseph Campbell, right here in New York, the novelist J.D. Salinger. Phil Goldberg has a chapter called the Swamis taught the smart guys, and the smart guys taught the rest of us. That's the name of the chapter. How a whole generation of intellectuals were influenced by Indian thought, and how that percolated into American thinking. Often credit is not given, often the sources are not known, but it is there. The influence is there. Just 2 years ago, I met this brilliant young Vietnamese researcher in Boston. He was doing his PhD in management studies in the philosophy of work. And he came to meet me and he said that he did not know anything about Swami Vivekananda. But when he was researching some of the greatest ideas which are there in the modern, Western business circles, for example, work as a means of spiritual transformation, work as a means of self-fulfillment, he said many of these ideas I traced back to one person who was a visitor from India for a short while in the United States, and his name was Swami Vivekananda. And so he's writing a thesis on that how one person's influence had a tremendous effect on different aspects of American life. So that was one side, the accumulated spiritual wisdom of a 5,000-year-old civilization flowed through Vivekananda, and not just Vivekananda. He opened the doors for it. He made it prestigious. He made it possible for the teachers who followed him to give their teachings to a very receptive audience. Sister Nivedita writes about him that when he stood up to speak in the Chicago World Parliament of Religions, he was not there on his own behalf. He did not speak about his own experiences. He did not even speak about his own spiritual master, Sri Ramakrishna. He spoke for all of Hinduism. He spoke for all of India. And Sister Nivedita writes, behind him stood a civilization 5,000 years old, and its accumulated wisdom flowed through Vivekananda. So Vivekananda becomes the meeting point of the East and the West. He was not quite the traditional Hindu monk, if you see his other brother disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Brahmananda and Shivananda and others, they are more like they fit the mold of the traditional Hindu holy man. But Vivekananda is an extraordinary character. So Nivedita writes, he becomes the meeting of the East and the West, and also very importantly, he becomes the point of meeting of the past and the future. So that's why Vivekananda is even more important today, because he is not only for the 19th and 20th centuries, but he is for the 21st century and for centuries to come. So this was his influence, one part of his mission. He definitely succeeded, and as the years go by, we see how tremendously he succeeded in that, becoming a bridge between the East and the West, between India and America. On the other hand, the other side of his mission, that he awakened his motherland. He had traveled the length and breadth of India, and he had seen that it was not a dead or dying civilization, as many were predicting. It's only sleeping, that it needed an impulse to awaken it to its former glory. And so he became this voice of India about her own greatness. So he traveled back to India, and his lectures from Colombo to Almora and throughout the rest of his life, he spent in trying to inspire his countrymen and men and women of his country. He defended India against her critics here in America. He did not give an inch. He fought back against the critics here, but when he went back to India, he was unsparing in his criticism of our social faults, of casteism, of the discrimination against women, of all the faults of Indian society and religion, which he saw at that time. So he did not spare any words to criticize and to awaken our spirit of reform and change. So these are, I think, the two great things which Vivekananda did. Somebody said he was the unconscious father of Indian nationalism. He was probably the first to consistently refer to himself as Indian. You see, at the time when national leaders often would regard themselves as leaders of a particular province, as Bengalis or Maharashtrians or Tamilians, Vivekananda continuously and consistently said that he was Indian. He would always call himself Indian. In fact, one of his American disciples said, who had never seen India, said that we fell in love with India just by hearing the word India from the lips of Vivekananda. There was so much love, so much reverence when he uttered the word India, and we fell in love with India. One of them asked him, an American disciple, asked Vivekananda, what can I do for you? And Vivekananda said, love India. He said that, so this is the feeling that he had for India. When he came back to India, he said that India I loved before, but my love has increased 1,000-fold after seeing the world when I come back to India. India is now the Punya Bhumi for me, the Tirtha. So his words awakened entire generations of leaders. I'll just mention a few, whether it's Aurobindo, who was deeply inspired by Vivekananda. He had a vision of Vivekananda while in Alipur jail. Tagore, who was his younger contemporary, spoke of him in the most positive terms. Mahatma Gandhi, poor Mahatma Gandhi is now a target of criticism both from the right and the left, but Gandhi held Swami Vivekananda in the highest regard. Once he went to meet Vivekananda, but at that time Vivekananda was very ill, so he could not meet Gandhiji. Next time again he went on the birthday of Swami Vivekananda, many years after Swami Vivekananda had passed. And he saw large numbers of people had gathered. So Gandhiji gave a short speech when he said that I have gone through the works of Swami Vivekananda carefully, and my love for my country has increased manifold by reading Vivekananda. I urge all the young people who have come here today not to go away empty-handed, but to take the message of Vivekananda with them. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, he gave a speech in the Ramakrishna Mission in New Delhi after independence. He said that all the national leaders of my generation were inspired by reading Vivekananda. And I would say it would be a great loss for the youth of this generation, that means 1950s at that time, if they do not read Vivekananda. Many do not know that Pandit Nehru's wife, Kamala Nehru, was actually a disciple of Swami Shivananda, the then president of the Ramakrishna Math. So, and Subhas Bose, of course, Vivekananda was his hero. In fact, at one time he tried to become a monk, but he was turned away luckily, and so the Swami Brahmananda told him that your destiny is different. But all throughout, he considered Vivekananda his hero. And down to today, Prime Minister Modi himself has acknowledged that how Vivekananda has been a source of inspiration for him in all his life. So you see, on all sides of the political divide throughout Indian history, whether political leaders, social leaders, thinkers, one person who is a unifier and who people accept, both on the right and the left, people accept unhesitatingly, is Vivekananda. So he had this tremendous impact on his own country, his own motherland. Sister Nivedita says that this was a lamp lit by Mother India to illumine her own greatness to herself and also as a light to the world. So that was Vivekananda. What constitutes Vivekananda? Three factors. One is the Shastras, the study. He studied Vedanta, Indian texts. By the way, when we say Vedanta, Vivekananda as Vedanta, he means Vedanta in a very broad and inclusive sense. There's a very strict classical definition of Vedanta. Vedanta nama Upanishad pramanam. Vedanta is the source of spiritual knowledge called the Upanishads. That's fine. And Vivekananda based himself entirely on the Upanishads. He said here in the West that I have taught only the Upanishads. In them, there is a mine of strength. All that people need for their liberation is to be found in the Upanishads. But Vivekananda used the term Vedanta in a general sense to encompass all of the spiritual wisdom of India. So for him, Vedanta was not only Advaita Vedanta, it was primarily Advaita Vedanta, but also Vishishta Advaita Vedanta, Dvaita Vedanta, also Patanjali Yoga. The first book he translated and published here in the United States was not a Vedanta book. It was the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, which was published as Raja Yoga, right from here in the Vedanta Society of New York. He included Bhakti, so Naradiya Bhakti Sutras, Bhagavatam, all of that he included in a general term by Vedanta, by which he meant Hinduism, he meant the spiritual wisdom of India, basically. So this was the first source of his inspiration, his study of the spiritual traditions of India, as well as the Western science and philosophy which he was exposed to at that time in his youth in Calcutta. The second source of his inspiration was Sri Ramakrishna, his guru. So what he had studied in the books, he found a living demonstration there. It's not just theory, not just something in the books, that actually one can have an experience of the divine. You know, he went around asking people, have you seen God? And he got this affirmative answer, very positive answer from Sri Ramakrishna. So that in this day and age, that an experience of the divine is possible, and it can have tremendous effects upon one's positive effects upon one's life. So that he saw in Sri Ramakrishna, this extraordinary demonstration of the truths which he found in the books, the spiritual texts. The third was India itself. Even after his training under Sri Ramakrishna, one more thing was left for his training, the exploration of India, that he walked from north to south, from east to west, sometimes on foot, sometimes on bullock cart, sometimes by train, staying with peasants, staying with Maharajas, and talking with people, the ordinary people of India. And he came to understand India. He came to understand the sorrows and sufferings of India, and his heart, you know, melted at the suffering of his countrymen. He came to understand what was needed for India to awaken and stand on her own feet again. So these are the three sources: the Shastra, Sri Ramakrishna, his guru, and India itself. Somebody said he was a condensed India. He embodied all of India in this one person. What were the teachings of Swami Vivekananda, the core ideas which he gave, upon which everything else is based? I'll just touch upon them quickly. He himself said, "My mission in life can be put in a few words. It is to preach unto humanity their own inner divinity and how to make it manifest in every movement of life." See, this is the core idea. He defined religion as the manifestation of the divinity which is already within us. The core idea is the divinity of the human. What does it mean? It means, this is the Vedantic idea of the Atman, that we are not just material beings. The real nature of the human being is not just the material, biological, physical body. It's not just the psychological, the mind. It's not even just the economic man or the social man, but it is the spiritual reality within us. That's our core, fundamental ground reality. What is the spiritual reality? When you say divinity, spiritual, is there a specific meaning to it? Yes, there is. These things have been very precisely defined in the Upanishads and other texts after that. Briefly, what it means is that the Upanishads say we are not just physical beings or even mental beings. We are beings of pure awareness. What does pure awareness mean? Pure here does not mean good in the sense of as distinguished from bad or impure. What it means is we are awareness itself. The Upanishads show us how by a philosophical inquiry into our own experience. These words are important. A philosophical inquiry into experience. We can come to see that we are not the body-mind. The body is a series of changes. It's an object, just like the table and the chair which you perceive. The body is also an object of which we are the subject. Just as I see a table or a chair, and that does not mean I am a table or a chair. It's an object which appears to me in my experience. But it is equally true that the body is also an object which appears to us in experience. Every sense organ can objectify the body. You can see the body, you can touch the body, you can smell, even taste, even hear the rumblings in your stomach if you're hungry. So all the sense organs, they objectify the body. The body is an object presented to us, and like all objects, it is subject, it changes. It comes and goes, it develops, it ages, it decays, and finally it dies. Similarly, the mind is an object too. Our thoughts and feelings and emotions are directly available to us. Each of us has an interior life. When we look inside, we find thoughts, emotions. I'm happy. I know that I am happy. I feel miserable. I know that I feel miserable. I'm anxious. I am directly aware of my anxiety. So this happy, sad, anxious, these emotions, our ideas, they are all objects. They're subtle objects. They are not subtle. By subtle, I mean not public objects like the body or a table or a chair, which is shared, which is experienced by everybody. But these are our first person experiences. What is that which experiences all of this? Clearly, it is awareness. It can't be anything other than consciousness or awareness. And Vedanta catches this, that this awareness which we are, it is that pure subject without any mixture of the object. That is what Vedanta calls the Atman or Sakshi. Notice here it is not something a matter of belief. It's not something you're supposed to believe in. It is, Vedanta claims it's continuously available to us. In fact, it's because we are conscious, or because that our nature is awareness, we can have all these experiences which we call life. Upanishad speaks about what is it that by which we can think and hear and smell and taste and see. All the experiences of our life are possible because of this awareness. Now, of course, many questions will come here. Upanishads do not regard awareness as a product of the brain and the nervous system, as mainstream materialist reductionist science might. Though, just a sidebar here. Right now, we are living in an interesting time where this question of consciousness has become uppermost. Right here in the United States, in New York, in fact, we have Professor David Chalmers, who coined the term, the hard problem of consciousness, that it is actually impossible to reduce consciousness to the brain and nervous system. It's sort of taken for granted among materialists, among mainstream science and medicine, that somehow the brain is producing consciousness. But how? So now there's an increasing understanding that it's not that we just don't know, and after some time we'll be able to know. It seems impossible in principle how an object, the brain is an object. It's a biological machine. The brain is an object. How can an object produce the subject? How can a material thing give us first-person experiences? So in many ways, this has become a serious, very huge question. And some of the theories which are now being proposed, for example, panpsychism, which is now being touted by David Chalmers himself right here in NYU, comes pretty close to, if you are trained in Indian philosophy, it comes pretty close to the Sankhya philosophy, which regards material nature as real and also consciousness as fundamental and real, and that they interact, but not that one is produced by the other. Of course, Vedanta goes in a different direction. So anyway, this idea that consciousness is fundamental somehow, this is now gaining ground, and I see it all around me. It's still not mainstream, but very respectable persons from different fields are independently coming to it. I remember this dialogue I had with Dr. Deepak Chopra here in New York, and when we're talking about the hard problem of consciousness, Dr. Chopra said, in Hindi, he said, "Ye sab, ye to hamare cheez leke ab, they are not giving us credit, these scientists and the philosophers here." And I said, Deepak ji, but it's good that if somebody comes to the same understanding which you get through Advaita or Sankhya, and yet comes to it from, like David Chalmers, he says, I'm not coming to it from an Eastern philosophy perspective. I'm coming to it completely from a hardcore materialistic Western philosophy and neuroscience perspective. That's great. If from an entirely different perspective and tradition, if you come to the same understanding, that's wonderful. So that is the first, the divinity within us. How is that? Why is that divinity? What good does it do? Notice, just as a sampling of what the tremendous results of this understanding are. Birth, death, old age, disease are of the body, not of awareness. if awareness and body are not the same thing, then awareness experiences what the body undergoes, but it is not the birth of awareness. Birth of the body is not the birth of awareness. Death of the body, therefore, by implication, would not be the death of awareness. Therefore, at least the possibility opens up when the Upanishads say that the Atman is immortal. In the Gita, Krishna says to Arjuna that the Atman is immortal. We begin to see that there might be an existence which is not touched by the birth and death of the body. Which is a tremendous implication for us. Misery, depression, anxiety, fear are of the mind, not of consciousness. Consciousness illumines the contents of the mind. So, therefore, you, the consciousness, even while experiencing the misery or the depression in the mind, you are not miserable. You are not depressed. You're just as you, the consciousness, reveal a cup of tea on the table. You are revealing the depression in the mind. And when you think in that way, remember, this thinking is going on in the mind. This understanding is entirely in the mind. When such an understanding comes to the mind, the whole problem is reframed. And one of the consequences is that the depression in the mind goes away. The unhappiness in the mind goes away. The fear in the mind is reduced. So there are very positive psychological consequences of this. And this is manifested in life. Swami Vivekananda did not just mean that you understand a philosophy of Vedanta, you feel or think that you are the Atman. That's just the beginning. But it must be expressed in life. Expressed in life means, can I live a life of fearlessness? Can I live a life free from anxiety and unhappiness? Can I live a life of altruism, unselfishness? Can I live a life which is, I'm not hungering and dependent on the world for my fulfillment? The traditional idea of the Jivan Mukta, free while living. So this is one, the first and most important idea which Swami Vivekananda communicated to the East and the West. The second idea is the oneness of all existence. The oneness of all existence, the unity of the universe. When you say we are consciousness, notice we are leaving everything out. How many consciousnesses are there? So right now in this meeting, we have 65 people. So do we have 65 consciousnesses in this meeting? It seems so. But Vedanta says, actually, consciousness is one reality. It's very counterintuitive. But Vedanta would reverse the question. Why would you say there are many consciousnesses? Clearly, there are many bodies. We can clearly count there are many bodies. Clearly, there are many minds, thoughts, feelings, our personal story, personality. There are many, 65 minds. But if you abstract consciousness from body-mind, then you will see there's no criterion to distinguish one consciousness from another. What is the criterion to distinguish awareness itself from awareness? So there are arguments. Sankhya gives arguments why consciousness is different. Sankhya talks about different consciousnesses. But those arguments, if you go into them, you will see they are easily dismissed. So Vedanta says, if one appreciates consciousness itself or awareness itself, Chaitanyam, one will begin to see there is no division in Chaitanya. It is one unbroken reality. And Advaita Vedanta goes further to say that, a tremendous assertion, that whatever you experience in awareness, all the objects, that cup of tea, your own body, your own thoughts, they are actually not apart from awareness. They are appearing to awareness, that's one. Then they are appearing in awareness, that's two, step two. And then finally, we come to see they are nothing but awareness appearing in those forms. A good example to understand this would be our dreams. You're sitting in a dream and talking to your friend, maybe seeing the scenery around. What after we wake up, what understanding do we get? Oh, the friend and the scenery appeared to me, but it was a dream. So it was appearing in me. And was there actually a friend, or were there actually trees and plants and animals? No, it was my mind alone, the dreamer's mind alone, which appeared in those forms. Now, Vedanta takes this example to the waking state and says, here it is all the play of consciousness alone, this Atman or Brahman, which is appearing in all these forms. So this is the old teaching of Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya Jiva Brahmaiva Napara. Brahman alone or consciousness alone is real. The world is an appearance in consciousness, and you are consciousness. Jiva Brahmeva Napara. You are not a body mind, you are actually consciousness experiencing life in this way. That means the universe is at its heart, in its most fundamental sense, one reality. So the oneness of the universe and the divinity of our own self, this is the core, the philosophical core of what Vivekananda taught. And there are many implications. I'll quickly touch upon some of those implications, which have tremendous consequences for us. And then I'll wrap it up. If you have any questions after that, we can also take a few questions, I think, yes. So what follows from this? Sister Nivedita writes in her introduction to the complete works of Swami Vivekananda, she says, all of this, all of which I just mentioned, all of this was already there before Vivekananda. Even if Vivekananda did not come, the Upanishads were there, the Gita was there, a vast mass of Vedantic literature is there, saying exactly these things, what I'm saying right now. Then what was Swami Vivekananda's unique contribution? Yes, he taught all this in a fresh way. He put it in simple, powerful, inspiring English. He taught it to the West. He taught it to the East. Correct. But anything new, anything revolutionary, something new did he add to this? He says, Sister Nivedita says, what Swami Vivekananda added to this was the teaching that one and the many are the same reality. Seen by different seekers in different attitudes at different times. What does this mean? One and the many. One is that ultimate reality which the Upanishads speak about, Brahman. Many is this what we experience, this universe. What is the relationship between the one and the many? This is basically a fundamental question of metaphysics anywhere. So Dvaita Vedanta, dualistic school of Vedanta would say, one and the many are separate. There is one ultimate reality, call it God or whatever it is, and there is this many, this universe which we experience, and they are separate, and they are all real by themselves. Vishishtadvaita Vedanta says that one and the many are one organic reality, the many are parts of the one. So Vishishtadvaita Vedanta, it says Jiva Jagat Vishishta Brahma. This entire universe and all of us sentient beings, we are part of that absolute reality. So part and whole relationship. Dualism is separation. Vishishtadvaita is part and whole relationship, amsha amshi. Advaita Vedanta, classical Advaita Vedanta of the Shankara type, is that the one is the reality, many is an appearance. Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. One is the absolute reality and many is an appearance which you dismiss, and you realize the one and you remain centered in the one. Swami Vivekananda extends this further. He says, yes, you realize the one, but then when you look back upon the many, you see that the many are nothing other than expressions of the one. It is one reality, which in samadhi, in your state of enlightenment, you see as the one reality. But after that, when the enlightened one comes back to this world and looks around and sees everything, does that enlightened one see everything as a false appearance to be dismissed and I should plunge back into samadhi again and ignore this world? Or does the enlightened one see this, all of this as the play of that one reality, as that one reality alone? One and the many are the same reality. What is the implication? The implications are tremendous. Sister Nivedita further writes, she says this is the crowning achievement of Swami Vivekananda's life. It is because of this Swami Vivekananda becomes a teacher of karma and bhakti, not as divorced from jnana, but as manifesting jnana. Action, manifesting the realization of the divine. Love, manifesting as the realization of the divine. Henceforth, no division between the sacred and the secular. It is not a secularization of the sacred. It's a spiritualization of the secular. That there's no division between the sacred and the secular. She goes on to say, very inspiring, to labor is to pray, to conquer is to renounce, to have and hold is as sacred a trust as to quit and avoid. It is this which makes, for Swami Vivekananda, the workshop, the study, and the farmer's field fit places for meeting between man and God, as fit for places for meeting between man and God as the door of a temple or the cell of a monk. See, through your academics, through your scientific research, through your service in the world, you can spiritualize this, and they all become modes of realization, of spiritual realization. So when he gave the motto to the Ramakrishna order, which he founded when he came back to India, he said, Atmano mokshartham jagat hitaya cha, for one's own liberation and for the welfare of the world. This expresses that idea, the one and the many are the same reality. What, if you put it simply, what does it mean? Spirituality and service. Spirituality and service. Apparently a twin ideal, but both are expressing one truth. So service becomes a philosophy of life. Wherever you are, whatever you are, you can lead a life of service. Of course, some have embodied this so well. I'm immediately thinking of your alumni, of whom you are all proud. Vinayak Lohani, who is right there in Calcutta, how he is inspired by Vivekananda, very staunchly so, and how he takes care of thousands of children in the Parivar Samsthan, manifesting this ideal of service. Literally at every bit of his being, he's manifesting that. And I know many of you support him, and you have helped him to set up that institution and to run it. But he is one example, and there are many others. It doesn't just have to be as social service, taking care of the poor or the disadvantaged. It could be at the level of academics. I know a friend of mine Professor Manish Singhal, who was a fellow at IIMC long ago, about 20 years back, and he is a professor of at XLRI, Jamshedpur. So his whole philosophy, his whole thing was how to spiritualize work, and that's what he has been doing all his life. And he started that right there in IIMC. I know of Srinivas Venkatram, who runs this institute called, this organization called Illumine Industries in Mumbai, where the whole idea is to bring the ideas of Swami Vivekananda and make them and implement them, design protocols to implement them to transform organizations. He has worked with Mumbai police, with schools, universities, with corporate houses. So you see, in various ways, this principle that service and spirituality, it can be implemented across society. Let me give you an example, since I mentioned Srinivas Venkatram, how he transforms these ideas and applies them in life today. Swami Vivekananda said the national ideals of India were renunciation and service, tyaga and seva, renunciation and service. Now, Srinivas told me that the first reaction of young people today would be renunciation. Why should I renounce? That seems like an imposition. Service. Why should I serve anybody? I'm here for myself, for my own good. Now, the same thing he rephrased and he put it, Srinivas Venkatram, tyaga and seva, he put it in this way. What is renunciation? Is a complete commitment to a high ideal. He put it in positive terms. So when you're totally committed to pursuing any one high ideal, it could be in science, it could be in academics, it could be in social service, in politics, or whatever, then automatically renunciation comes into your life. All other things, all nonsense drops up from your life when you're pursuing a very high ideal in life. And then seva, service. Srinivas Venkatram, he rephrased it. He put it in this way. He says it is a commitment to the evolutionary potential of all beings. Whoever you are, wherever you are, I believe that your life can be better, and I would like to help you to do that. That is seva. That's a wonderful way of putting seva. So you see, tyaga and seva, a commitment to pursuing a very high ideal in life, that is renunciation, and a commitment to the evolutionary potential of all beings. So in this wonderful way, he has rephrased Swami Vivekananda's idea, and it becomes something that's very appealing to everybody who does not want this kind of a noble life. So I have almost run out of time. Let me touch upon one very important issue, and then I'll quickly wrap up. So how did Swami Vivekananda apply this? Sister Nivedita says this ideal of one and the many, it's so crucial that everything Swami Vivekananda said can be understood as a development of this one theme, that the one and the many are the same reality. The harmony of religions. So Swami Vivekananda, when he stood up to speak, remember, it was 11 September and I'm sitting here in New York. So when you say 9/11 in New York, it means something else. When religious fanaticism led to a terrible disaster here, knocking down the Twin Towers and thousands of people were killed because of fanaticism in the name of religion. Swami Vivekananda, more than 100 years ago, seemed to be so prophetic when he said that fanaticism has drowned the world drenched the world in blood. We not only accept, not only tolerate. Toleration is just, it's not enough. It's just a way of saying that I differ from you. I think you are wrong, and I don't accept you at all. But I'm just willing to put up with you. A religious scholar here at Harvard, he said, toleration is the garbage standard. It's a garbage standard. Swami Vivekananda said acceptance. We accept all religions as true. And then he says, as a Hindu, I can kneel down with the Christian in the church. I can pray with the Muslim in the mosque and kneel before the fire and worship with the Zoroastrian and so on. Why? Because the core truths in all religions are the same. If one and the many are the same reality, then all the religions that we see in the world must be different ways of reaching that same reality. This here he was echoing his master's teaching, Sri Ramakrishna's Jato Mat Tato Pat. As many faiths, so many ways to realize God or to attain spiritual enlightenment. So Sri Ramakrishna would say that there is one ultimate reality, but it is known by different names. In his simple homespun Bengali, he would say, in the pukur, the pond, the Bengalis, Hindus, they call it jal, Muslims call it pani, and the Christians call it water. And at that time, the British were in India, in Calcutta, so they call it water and so on. But they're all talking about the same reality. He's just echoing something that has been part of the Indian tradition since the most ancient times. The Rig Vedic dictum of Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti. The truth is one. The wise speak of it differently. This becomes the basis of a harmony of religions. There is Robert Wright here in Princeton. He's a neo-Darwinian. He's written an interesting book called The Evolution of God, where he talks about how the religions, basically Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, have evolved over time. And he uses Darwinian analysis to show how their doctrines have been shaped because of various socio-political pressures. Doesn't talk about Hinduism until the very last chapter, when he says, what is the possibility of peace between religions? And then he says, the ancient Hindus had a doctrine that the truth is one, but it is expressed variously by different teachers or different sages. And that enabled the ancient Indians to avoid bloodshed in the name of religion. And he says that the only way I see that there can be peace between the major religions of the world is that if they accept something like that doctrine. So you see, here is somebody who is not a Hindu, not even a religious person. He declares himself as an atheist, a Darwinian atheist. But he sees that this idea, the truth is one, but it is expressed differently as the foundation for the harmony of religions. Then all the religions become paths for the realization of that reality which can be expressed in different ways. Then what are the different religions of the world? They are paths. They take you along different ways and maybe show you different aspects of that infinite reality. Like the story of the 5 blind men touching the elephant and coming to different, someone touches the tail of the elephant, the leg of the elephant, the trunk of the elephant, and they cannot agree among each other, but they are all touching the same creature. So different religions may differ among each other, but they are all leading us to one infinite reality. And Swami Vivekananda also extended these ideas are from Sri Ramakrishna, but he extended them. He said, that the religions of the world are actually not contradictory. They seem to be, but they are complementary. And we can learn from other religions. We can enrich our own religious spiritual experience by studying other religions. So Swami Vivekananda's approach was a very cosmopolitan approach. Why I'm using that word, a new book is being released this month from Oxford University Press, Swami Vivekananda's Vedantic Cosmopolitanism. So the cosmopolitan approach is a city like Calcutta or say New York, where you have multiple cultures living together. We don't live in ghettos. We eat each other's food. We hear each other's language being spoken. Our language uses the words from other languages. We enjoy each other's holidays and cultures. So this is the experience of living in a cosmopolis, where you have your own culture, but you are enriched by the presence of multiple cultures. Similarly, you have your own religious spiritual tradition, but you are enriched, your own spirituality is enriched by other spiritual traditions. Swami Vivekananda was in favor of that kind of cosmopolitan approach in spirituality. It's always been there in Hinduism and from most ancient times. It's only that Sri Ramakrishna and Vivekananda made it very explicit in this day and age. So the harmony of religions. What else? Quickly, within a couple of sentences, there are many implications of the same doctrine of one and the many. For example, Swami Vivekananda's interest in science and religion. He set up a dialogue here, right here in USA, between William James at Harvard University. There was Nikola Tesla, who used to come and attend Swami Vivekananda's talks. People had begun to forget him, but thanks to Elon Musk, now we have the Tesla car, so people now remember Nikola Tesla. He used to attend Vivekananda's talks not only in the World Parliament of Religions, but there's a very fascinating letters, this conversation through letters between Vivekananda and Tesla. Vivekananda felt that since we inhabit one universe, at some point, spirituality, which was to him truth, and science, to him that was truth, and yet so they cannot be contradictory. In some way, they must map onto each other. And he was very interested in knowing how it can be done. I mean, I hear that in quantum physics, there's some amazing resemblances to ancient Indian thought, Vedanta and Sankhya. I'm not a physicist, so I cannot comment on that. But definitely I can say that the recent developments in consciousness studies are very promising. So for mapping science and metaphysics, science and Vedanta from that angle. Just as a sidebar, the very well-known cosmologist Brian Greene, who was here in Colombia, he was launching his book Until the End of Time at Harvard. And in the book launch talk, I was there. I asked him about what he thought about the similarities in, say, ancient Indian cosmology and modern science. He said, these are his words, and he's actually written it in the book. He said that that what is given in the Vedas is not science. It's expressed in poetic language, maybe, but it definitely has parallels with what we are discovering in the latest of science. You know, it has a poetic parallel, you might say, expressing the same principles. So that was very interesting when he said that. Then one more area would be education. Why is a monk, a Hindu monk, a Vedantin, why is he interested in education and nation building? Again, one and the many are the same reality. He does not see it as a different field. For him, yoga and meditation and education, they're all different facets of spirituality. Why is a monk on a ship meeting someone like Jamshedji Tata on the way to the United States and talking about fundamental science research in India? I mean, just imagine what came of that one conversation. Jamshedji Tata spoke with Vivekananda long before Vivekananda was well known, you know, and Vivekananda told him of the importance of setting up a fundamental science research institute in India. Ultimately, that becomes the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore. Even now, it is known as the Tata Institute. And Tata writes to Vivekananda, letter is available, and it's there on the IISc website also. He writes to Vivekananda that you may remember me, we met on the ship, and you proposed to me this idea of setting up an institute for fundamental research in science. I can think of no better person to be the director of such an institute than yourself. Of course, Vivekananda did not become the director, and the institute was set up after Jamshedji Tata himself passed, but because of his impulse, it was set up. Just a little observation. I was thinking that many of the directors of the IITs, the founders of the IITs, they were trained in IISc Bangalore. Then they went on to set up the IITs. And these graduates of IIMs and IITs, which fuel the present IT revolution in India and also here in the United States. You see how there's the connection is there, all starting from a conversation which a monk had with a Parsi entrepreneur on board a ship going to the United States in 1893. And the result of that today. Yet it's all based on that one and the many are the same reality. Swami Vivekananda's philosophy of ethics based on Advaita Vedanta. There's a very beautiful article written by Swami Bhajananandaji on the ontological ethics of Swami Vivekananda. But anyway, that's a subject for discussion on some other date, hopefully. I have rambled a little bit, but I hope I've shared my enthusiasm for Vivekananda, if nothing else. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Thank you so much. We'll take a couple of questions. Let me see the chat box. Okay, let me just read out Dr. Govindraj's comment here. Shankaracharya says that there is no difference between Jagrat and Swapna, but Jagrat has continuity. If I've read chapter 6 of Bhagavad Gita today, tomorrow I can start from chapter 7. That kind of continuity will not be there in Swapna. How can we equate them? Yes. So there are multiple objections. I have no time to go into them, but whatever objection you can give to distinguish Jagrat and Swapna, that is waking and dreaming, there are answers to that. Now let me back up a little bit and say, without equating Jagrat and Swapna, you can still have Advaita Vedanta, but that will be the mode called Srishti Drishtivada. This Jagrat and Swapna equating both is peculiar to the Mandukya Upanishad and Mandukya Karika, which is based on a mode called Drishti Srishtivada, which is a little more advanced. Now, I'll just make one comment here. Continuity in the waking and lack of continuity in dreams. Now, let me just make a comment and think there's something to think about. Suppose there would be continuity in dreams. Next, when you fall asleep and you would have the same dream when you go into sleep every day. Would that make dreams real? Would you say, now my dreams have become real because every dream is continuous? No. On the other hand, suppose continuity is lost in the waking state. Suppose someone has deep amnesia, short-term memory is destroyed. So every day the person wakes up and is not aware of what has happened in the last few hours or days. Would that make waking unreal? Would it make it a dream? No. So continuity seems to lend reality to something, but it does not actually, if you think about it this way.
Ria has asked a question. Upanishads mention numerous pointers which reveal to us that we are the witness consciousness. How can this pointer be lived as a living reality by us in everyday life?
Correct. These pointers first have to be absorbed, that it must become very clear to us that we are awareness. Second, the mind must be prepared. Preparation of the mind means transcending our limited selfish desires. The more I hold on to expectations from the world, the more I think that the world has to fulfill my desires. Even Vedantic understanding will remain like a nice philosophy. You will not be able to lead life according to it. A pure, desireless mind, focused mind, holding on to that understanding that I am awareness, you will begin to see its effects in day-to-day life. That is called Jivan Mukti. This shifting of the identity with body-mind to the awareness. And then you live through the body-mind. That will be a life of freedom. You want to know more how it is done? Bhagavad Gita, 2nd chapter, towards the end, Arjuna asks this question to Krishna. What is the nature of a person who has become enlightened? Sthita prajna saka bhasha. How does this person talk, walk? Basically what you're asking, how does this person live? Now Krishna gives a description. What is the description of the nature of the enlightened being? That becomes a practice for the rest of us. Here I'm quoting Shankaracharya's Bhashya. So if you see that, you will understand what is to be done. Professor Rohan Chinchwadkar from IIT Mumbai. 2 questions. How can professors apply the teachings of Swami Vivekananda, Vedanta in the teaching, research, and administration? How do you think these teachings can be introduced to students at the undergrad, postgrad level? Big questions. But I have people who are doing that. I know people. I mentioned Sriram Venkatram. I know a monk who is right there in Mumbai, Mahan Maharaj, who's a noted mathematician, a topologist. He is, I think, it's a very fascinating life story, isn't it? If you think about it, he has been borrowed from Belur Mutt by Tata Institute of Fundamental Research to do research in string theory. So, what an interesting idea! A monk is doing research in cutting-edge string theory and topology, and it's possible because of Vivekananda. Again, goes back to one and the many. Sister Nivedita said, Vivekananda told us, Sister Nivedita is writing, Vivekananda told us, science, art, and religion can take you to the same realization. But for this, you need the understanding of Advaita Vedanta. Not necessarily that doing mathematics will lead you to enlightenment, but it can be spiritualized. So academics can and should be spiritualized. I felt my little experience here in different universities in India and in the United States. I think if professors and scholars have a spiritual foundation, doesn't have to be Vedanta. You could be a devout Christian, you could be a Sufi, you could be a Taoist, but some kind of deep spirituality, it's very helpful for their own peace of mind, and it's a blessing for people around them also.
Some book for children, somebody is asking.
There's so many books. Some movies have been made. I heard there's a movie called Lion King, which is very Vedantic in its theme, and it's very popular among children. And of course, there are stories of Vivekananda and like picture books, which we got from our grandparents when we were children. I don't know if children today would want to read books, but that can be given. Oh, one idea, and it might sound strange. Amar Chitrakatha comics. One Swamiji who used to hold a discussion circle in IIT Chennai, he said he found his boys and girls there very brilliant, but they were so immersed in their preparation for IIT and finally getting through to IIT, they have hardly any idea of the humanities. Some effort is being made in the IITs to introduce humanities, but they have no time to read big books on history. So what he had a stroke of insight. He introduced this Amar Chitrakatha comics. I think now they are available in full set.
Yes.
And it became a big hit in the hostels in IIT Chennai. The kids were all borrowing it and reading it very fast. And that gives you a general, at least a sweeping idea of Indian ethos, of the freedom struggle, all the characters in 3,000-4,000 years of Indian history and prehistory also. So that's a good idea. That's something that you can share with children.
Thank you very much, Sarvapriyananda ji. It was really, a happy moment when you said you can do it. So hopefully we will see you physically here in MCHV premises. And till then, namaskar. And thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you for joining. And thanks, Swamiji, for making it possible.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.